Whatever the weather, something strolls along our street every night whistling quietly. When they walk by, you can only hear it if you're in the kitchen or living room, and it always begins at precisely 3:03. Somewhere along the lane's beginning, close to the Carson residence, the sound first becomes weak. The whistling passes by us as we go closer to the center of the roadway before vanishing in the direction of the cul-de-sac. My sister and I used to sneak into the kitchen at night to listen when we were younger. Mom and Dad didn't like that and would send us to hell if they discovered us there, but they never punished us severely because we always followed the one big rule: avoid attempting to look at the whistling object. My community is a humorous place. I've called this place home since I was 6, and I adore it. The homes are modest in size but well maintained, with sizable yards and lots of open space. There are many other children here who are my age. I turned 13 in October. We played foursquare in the cul-de-sac constantly when we were kids, and in the summer we would go from back porch to back porch. I'm old enough to see that this was a terrific place to grow up. The night whistling and the good luck are the only two peculiar things present. I was never too concerned by the whistling. I couldn't even hear it from my bedroom, as I already stated. But because my parents don't enjoy discussing it, I've given up asking questions. My father is a strong, tall, and composed man. Since he immigrated to the US as a child, he had an accent. My grandparents and his family are natives of the islands. They refer to it by that name. The only time my father loses his composure is when the whistler starts to blow. He then speaks more quickly and blinks more quickly as he urges us not to overthink it and to always keep in mind the one rule, the big rule: don't attempt to look outside when the whistler passes by. Not that, even if we wanted to, we could look. You see, every window has thick, sturdy canvas shutters that can be pulled down from the top and fastened to the bottom of the window frame. Even the latches have a little lock on them, roughly the size of a journal. Every night before we all go to bed, my father locks the shutters and keeps the key in his room. My mom! She may or may not believe the whistling is appropriate. When the sound starts at 3:03, I've previously seen her in the living room. If I just swung my door open an inch, I could see her. She doesn't hang out there very frequently, at least not often enough for me to see her, but once or twice a month, I believe she sits outside on our large red couch and simply listens. Every night, the whistler plays the same tune. It's cheerful, da-da-da-da-da-dum da-da-da-da-da-dum. Recall how I stated my home has two peculiar characteristics? Everyone in my neighborhood is really fortunate, with the exception of our night whistler. Dad doesn't like us talking much about this aspect, and it's difficult to describe, but nice things just tend to happen to folks around here a lot. But most of the time, it's little things like winning a radio contest, receiving an unexpected promotion at work, or discovering some real, authentic arrowheads buried in the yard. There is no crime, excellent weather, and everyone's gardens bloom brighter in the fall. Living here is a million little blessings, as my mother has described it. However, my sister Jenny is the key factor keeping us here and the reason we relocated here in the first place. She had a serious lung condition when she was born. When she was born, we were only allowed to visit her in the hospital, not bring her home. I recall how tiny she was, smaller than the other newborns, even. For her, a machine had to breathe. To be nearer the hospital, we moved into this house. Jenny began to improve as soon as we arrived here. We could all tell that the physicians were perplexed since they couldn't figure it out and simply attributed it to what they were doing. But my parents and even I understood that Jenny's recovery was simply one of the countless minor advantages of living in our neighborhood. Therefore, even after learning that occasionally, awful things happen here for every minor miracle that occurs every day, we stayed because of this. However, you can only find them if you look for the whistler. You see, there is a welcoming committee in our community. Every time a new resident comes in, they arrive bearing macaroni casserole, a gift basket, and a manila folder. They are really cordial. When we first moved in 7 years ago, 4 people arrived. The committee passed me a Snickers bar, engaged in small chat, and alternated holding Jenny. They were especially cautious because it was her first week out of the hospital. The committee then requested a private conversation with my parents, so I was taken to my room, where I essentially caught every word that was said. The area was described to my parents by the welcoming committee as being extremely difficult to explain pleasant. My parents were subsequently informed about the even more perplexing whistling that started every morning at 3:03 and finished at the tick of 3:05. My parents were advised by the group of people who had moved in next door that the whistling was harmless as long as we didn't try to find out what was creating it and that it was silent. They emphasized this, and I pressed my ear against the door in an effort to hear them. People's fortunes changed when they went in search of the whistler, sometimes tragically. Anyone who looked would see a dark cloud above them. Almost everything that might go wrong did. Newspaper clippings, accounts of fatalities in the public, odd incidents, and stories about lives destroyed were all included in the manila package the committee brought over. I overheard the chairman of the committee telling my father, "Not everyone dies. But they lose their life. Even if they survive, they will never again have any presence or light inside of them." I could tell that my mother wasn't treating it seriously. She kept questioning if they were pulling a joke on the new neighbors. When the committee tried to scare us out of our new home at one point, my mom became irate and accused them of being racist because my dad is from the islands. She also questioned their motives. She became more composed after my father assured her that he could tell our new neighbors were sincere and were wanting to assist us. He said he knew there were unusual creatures around us because he had grown up hearing stories of this nature from his mother. The majority of those weird things were only different, some of them were pleasant and some of them bad. Dad went to the hardware shop after the committee dispersed, purchased the canvas blinds, latches, and locks, and placed them on all of the house's windows after dinner. I sneaked out of my room that first night in our new home at 3 in the morning to find my dad awake and holding my infant sister on the couch in the living room. My dad tapped the couch next to him while holding up his finger in a shh gesture. We waited while I sat. We first heard the whistle at 3:03 precisely. Da-da-da-da-da-da-dum da-da-da-da-da-da-dum. According to what our neighbors stated, it came and left. Every night, the whistling comes again, and we never look while we count our daily blessings. Jenny has developed into a strong, intelligent girl who can breathe on her own. Even my father volunteered for the welcome committee. Why would anyone want to move when we don't often get new neighbors? However, my dad and the committee provide macaroni casserole, a gift basket, and the manila folder to the new residents when they move in. I can always tell if the family took the committee seriously or if we would soon be having new neighbors by the expression on my dad's face when he returns. A family just recently moved in next door to us. Ms. Maddie, the former owner, passed away at 105 years old. Her life had been good and lengthy. The new neighbors next door appeared to blend in seamlessly. They heeded my dad's advice regarding the locking shutters because they had a young child of their own and trusted the welcoming committee. My dad never allowed us to see any of the newspaper articles or other material in the manila folder. But given that our neighbors got along without any issues for the first month, I assume it must have been very convincing. Our new neighbors sent their kid Matt to stay with us one night when they had to leave the city. He was in school a year behind me, at age 12. Even though I didn't know him well before that evening, I could tell something was wrong the moment his parents dropped him off after dinner. "Do you know who is always whistling at night out there?" Matt questioned as soon as the grown-ups left the room. We were 3 people lounging in the den with the Disney film aimlessly playing on the television. I cast a quick peek at my sister. I replied, "We don't talk about it." Matt guessed, "I suppose it's that oddball who lives in the big yellow house on the corner." My sister questioned, "Mr. Tolles? He's incredibly sweet, therefore there's no way." Matt gave a shrug. Then, "Must be a deranged killer." Jenny stiffened. "We don't discuss it," I said again. "Let's play Nintendo in my room." The following few hours were spent watching movies, eating popcorn, and playing games. A regular overnight, though I could tell Matt was growing restless. Matt got up from his beanbag and strolled over to where Jenny and I were sitting on my bed after my parents said goodnight, closed the blinds, and went to bed. He questioned, "Have you ever tried looking? It's almost time." We had conveniently disregarded any suggestions of a bedtime, as with most sleepovers. It was almost 3 a.m., and I was astonished to see that he was correct. I moaned. "No, we don't. He ignored me and said, "See, I can't even try to see because my dad locks the blinds every night and hides the key." "Our dad does, too," Jenny replied. Matt said, "No. He doesn't, no." I said, a little harder than I wanted to sound, "You saw him do it." Matt chuckled. "Yes, your father locks the blinds, but he doesn't keep the key hidden. On his standard keychain, he keeps it." "So?" I inquired, fearful that he might say something I already knew. Because I had observed that my father had stopped hiding the key after so many years. Since he was aware that we took it seriously. "So I went to the restroom after your dad locked up but before your parents went to bed. On the way, I might have peered into their room and noticed your dad's keychain on his nightstand. I might have then gone and borrowed the blind's key." As Jenny and I gazed at him, his grin continued to widen. "You're lying," I retorted. Matt gave a shrug. "If you like, you can check. To find his keychain, simply open your parents' door and check. It is sitting there on the nightstand." I told them both to stay put, "Don't budge 1 inch." I hastened to my parents' room but paused at the threshold. If Matt hadn't lied, my father would be upset. Beyond irate when I considered it, I felt afraid. However, I'm more afraid of an open window when the whistler is standing outside. I hesitantly pushed open the door and peered inside, but it was too dark to see. I walked into the space after taking a big breath. I froze 2 steps into the shadows. Beginning to whine, I could plainly hear it coming from my parents' room, too. They must have heard the sound every night since we moved into the house, but I never realized it. We were never informed. I doubt that I could have fallen asleep during it. I wasn't sure whether to put on a light or call for my dad as I stood there and listened to the whistling get louder. I was drawn back to reality by soft noises coming from the living room. I screamed Jenny and bolted from my parents' bedroom. Standing by a window next to the entrance door, Matt and Jenny were there. Matt was being honest. He was fumbling with one of the blind's locks, and I could see it. A click was heard. In fact, he had the key. Matt chuckled briefly. Jenny stooped down next to him, possibly inquisitive but also terrified. The whistling was now heard directly outside of our home. I believe I called out and made a sound. I can't recall. The hands of the clock appeared to be nailed to the face, and time appeared to be frozen. But I couldn't help but move. I've never been athletic, and I'm not fast. But in a split second I had filled the space between me and Jenny. My gaze was fixed on her, but I heard Matt fully lower the blind so that it could release. Just on the other side of the glass, I could hear whistling as well as the snap of it beginning to ascend. However, I was holding Jenny in my arms and I turned us away from the window. I closed my eyes and closed my mouth. The blind suddenly opened. Whistling has stopped. Jenny trembled in my arms. "Don't look, please," I told her. "Don't go around again." She was facing the hallway and I was facing the window when we were in this position. I continued to have closed eyelids. My shoulder was touched by her nod. I tried to touch Matt with the arm that wasn't holding Jenny. My hand made contact with his arm. More than Jenny, he was trembling. "Matt?" I queried. Silence. With my eyes still closed, I moved past him and gently probed for the window. The glass was chilly to the touch. It was cooler than it should have been given the season. I reached up the window and felt for the blind's rope. The deeper I reached, the warmer the glass became, and I could feel a soft hum radiating back into my fingertips. I made an effort not to consider what might be outside the window. I pulled the shades shut after touching the string one last time. I slid my eyelids open. Matt was pallid and little, peering out the now closed window in the weak light coming from the kitchen. "Matt?" I re-asked. He yelled as he turned to face me. Everything started moving quickly. The living room's lights came on after the lights in the hallway. The hardwood floor was thudded by my parents' footsteps. I didn't turn to face them because Matt had my whole attention. He bit his lip so hard that a thin red line of blood ran down his chin, and he was pale and had wet himself. My father questioned me from behind, "What happened?" I was able to turn away from Matt and glance behind me. He observed, My father had never before shown terrified, but that evening, at that precise moment, I noticed an old, ugly horror stitched onto his face. A worried parent. "Only Matt? To me," he mouthed. "Yes," I nodded. Dad took a deep breath. He was so relieved that I almost thought he would applaud. My dad's expression shifted as he turned to face Matt. I questioned whether he felt awful about thinking it was great that Matt was the only one who looked. A knock on the door was heard. We all went cold. Matt sobbed. My mother advised me, "Don't respond." At the entrance to the hall, she was standing. In contrast to how I had always perceived her, that night we were all convinced that the whistler and the windows were real. I saw that my parents were holding baseball bats in their hands, which they must have acquired from their bedroom. The knock returned, this time a little louder. Matt pleaded with her not to open the door. My father approached him and gave him a tight hug. My father assured me, still clutching the bat, "We won't. Nothing will enter this room tonight." With a loud thud. This time, the door was shaken by the loud knocking. Jenny wrapped her arms around my neck as Matt shouted once more. My mother approached us and crouched down next to us, encircling my sister and I. With a loud thud. My mom whispered to my dad, "Call the cops." The knocking abruptly came to an end. My father cast a sidelong glance at us. "Do you believe?" He was interrupted by furious knocking that eventually faded into a gracious tap tap tap. From the other side of the door, someone or something said, "Police." The voice coming from outside was just like my mother, speaking to her like a parrot. "Call the cops, say, police. Tap police 3 times." My mother drew us nearer. "Police! Police! Police!" I heard her whisper, "Plaza stop." My dad answered, "I don't think calling them will help. How will we recognize them when they arrive at the door?" More forcefully than before, the knocking returned. The door trembled. Then came a halt. After some time, I once more heard someone hammering on our back door. Together, we turned towards the back door, but the knocking soon moved back to the front door. Back to front, front to back, loud, then quiet, then loud again. And immediately, both doors were emitting a loud, heavy sound that sounded like a sledgehammer. Then something began to rap at the walls in all of the house's windows. We felt as though we were residing inside of a drum that had a dozen musicians trying to play simultaneously. Or perhaps we were a turtle and something was trying to rip us from our shell with its claws. "Stop!" Matt cried out. Knocking stopped. Matt said, gazing at the door, "I won't tell. I swear I won't reveal anything I witnessed. Please just leave." We held out for almost a minute. Then, from the window Matt had been looking out of earlier, we heard a faint tap tap tap. Matt broke down in tears, crying out like a prisoner seeing a gallows being constructed outside their cell. My dad held him and combed his hair, but he never told him the truth or that everything would be alright. The remainder of the evening saw the tapping on the window. I don't know how long we gathered together in the living room. My dad eventually stayed to keep an eye on the door while my mom attempted to take the kids and I into my room. However, the knocking returned as soon as we entered my bedroom, this time much louder and easier to miss. I feared it wouldn't fit through the door. The knocking ceased when we returned to the living room. There was nothing but the tap 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 on the window. We all stayed awake that night. Around 7 AM, the tapping stopped. Around that time, the sun begins to rise in this area. My dad finally opened the blinds on one window after another 2 hours of waiting. He ordered us to return together to my parents' room first. He came back and when I heard him open the door, "Okay," he said to us. "It's finished." The parents of Matt returned around midday. Matt was brought over to his house by my parents, where they all stayed inside for a bit. I viewed out the window with Jenny. She stayed by my side the entire day, occasionally taking my hand. My parents appeared dejected when they returned, but they wouldn't tell us what they had said to Matt's folks. We all spent the day together, ordering pizza and watching movies because it was a Sunday. Everyone stayed in my room that night, including Jenny, my mom, and my dad, who was in a chair he had pulled over. That night or any night after, there was no knocking. For the remainder of that week, we didn't see Matt or his parents very often, but on Thursday, a moving truck was in their driveway. After school, Jenny and I spent the entire afternoon watching them pack stuff. The thing I remember the most is how worn out Matt and his parents seemed to be. The same three people shared a pallor, a grimace, and lightless eyes. I could already sense that something was seriously wrong from across the street. Before dusk, Matt and his family left. When my parents and I first moved in, I still recall what the initial welcoming committee said to them. Even those who survive seeing the whistler have their light taken away, and the remainder of their lives are filled with misery. Not everyone who sees the whistler passes away. Numerous minor catastrophes. I suppose Matt's parents must have looked, either to share the burden if they believed or to console him if they didn't. Some days I watch Jenny and I wonder if I had been slower, if she had looked out the window that night, would I have looked too? She is always happy and young and vibrant. To reassure her? To split that load? I'm relieved I won't have to learn. In that neighborhood and in that house, we still reside. Every night, we can still hear our whistler passing by. The wonderful things, the luck, and the blessings are too great to leave. But we take care. We no longer invite friends over to stay the night. And my dad is a master at keeping the blind's key very, very hidden. Not that I have looked for it. You simply don't need to search for some things,